The old lighthouse keeper, Silas, always said the fog had teeth. Tonight, it was thicker than he'd ever seen, a choking, gray beast that swallowed the sound of the crashing waves. He was in the lantern room, the great light turning, a solitary golden eye in the endless gray. A sound, a low scraping, echoed from the base of the tower. It was a sound he knew, the sound of something heavy being dragged across the stone. He grabbed a heavy iron poker from beside the small stove and started his descent down the winding stone staircase. The scraping stopped. The only sound now was the rhythmic groan of the turning lantern above and the frantic thumping of his own heart. Each step echoed in the oppressive silence. He reached the bottom, the air thick and cold. The main door, solid oak and barred with iron, was rattling in its frame. A deep, guttural voice whispered from the other side of the door. It spoke a language he didn't understand, ancient and chilling. Then came a single, sharp knock that vibrated through the very stones of the lighthouse. Silas froze, his breath catching in his throat. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that whatever was outside was not from this world. The knocking came again, louder this time, a thunderous booming that shook the entire tower. The iron bar across the door began to bend, the wood splintering around it. Silas backed away, his poker feeling like a child's toy. The fog pressed in at the small windows, no longer just mist, but something solid, something watching. The lighthouse was no longer a beacon, it was a cage, and the thing outside had the key. With a final, deafening crack, the oak door shattered inwards. Shards of wood and iron flew across the room. A shape began to coalesce in the doorway, a form made of the fog itself, but darker, more substantial. It was a shifting, indistinct silhouette, and from it came a cold that was not of the sea, but of the grave. Silas didn't wait. He turned and fled back up the winding stairs, his terror giving him speed he hadn't known in years. Below, the thing from the fog moved. It didn't walk, it flowed, a river of shadow and mist that began to ascend the stairs. The scraping sound returned, louder now, the sound of countless sharp points, like teeth, dragging against the stone with every movement. Silas reached the lantern room, gasping for breath, and slammed the heavy iron trapdoor shut. He fumbled with the bolt, his hands shaking too much to secure it. The scraping stopped directly below the trapdoor. A profound silence fell, heavier and more terrifying than the noise it replaced. Then, the iron trapdoor bulged upwards with a deafening groan. Silas threw his entire weight onto it, but he was no match for the thing's strength. The metal began to tear at the hinges. Through the widening gap, he saw not a face, but a swirling vortex of shadow, and he heard the whispering voice again, this time inside his own head. An idea, born of desperation, flashed in his mind. The light. The creature came from the dark. From the fog. Perhaps it feared the light. With a final, desperate shove, he scrambled away from the trapdoor and towards the great lantern. The mechanism was hot, the gears grinding, but he knew its secrets. He unlatched a focusing lens, a heavy piece of polished brass and glass, and wrestled it free from its housing. The trapdoor burst open, and the fog creature surged into the room. It was a towering column of churning darkness, the whispers in his mind becoming a deafening roar. Just as it lunged, Silas swung the heavy lens into the path of the lantern's beam. A blade of pure, concentrated light, hotter than a furnace, sliced through the room and struck the creature dead center. A shriek tore through the air, a sound of pure agony that was not made by any earthly throat. The creature dissolved where the light touched it, turning to steam and smoke. It recoiled, flowing backwards out of the trapdoor, away from the searing beam. The whispers in Silas's head vanished, replaced by the pounding of his own blood in his ears. He stood, shaking, holding the lens, the golden light his only shield. For now, he was safe. But he knew this was not the end. The fog would return, and its teeth were sharp. The silence that followed was almost as terrifying as the screams. Silas, trembling with exhaustion, kept the lens aimed at the gaping hole in the floor. The beam cut a sharp, golden path into the darkness of the stairwell. Then he heard a new sound. A stuttering, grinding noise from the heart of the lantern itself. The great light, his only weapon, began to flicker, the lantern's steady rotation faltered, the beam lurching and then stopping altogether. The creature's assault had damaged the delicate clockwork mechanism. A cold dread washed over Silas. Without the sweeping light, ships would be blind in the fog. And without the light, his lens was just a piece of glass. He had to fix it. He had to get the light moving again. He propped the lens on a crate, its beam a stationary guard upon the trapdoor, and scrambled up the iron ladder to the gears. They were hot and slick with grease. As he reached for a wrench, the whispers returned, slithering into his mind. So tired, old man. So alone. Let the fog take you. Let it be warm. Let it be the end. An image bloomed in his mind, his wife, Ilara, who the sea had claimed decades ago. She stood on the far side of the lantern room, smiling, her hand outstretched. "Come with me, my love," her voice echoed in his head. "Your watch is over." For a heartbeat, Silas hesitated, the wrench feeling impossibly heavy. The peace she offered was so tempting, from the darkness outside. A ship's horn blared, a desperate, mournful cry for a light that was failing. The sound shattered the illusion. Ilara vanished. The whispers in his head recoiled with a hiss of fury. That horn was a life, a crew, a ship full of souls trusting in him. His resolve hardened like steel. He was a lighthouse keeper. He would not fail his watch. As if in answer to his defiance, the fog outside slammed against the lantern room glass. It was no longer a shapeless mist. Dozens of shadowy, razor-tipped tendrils writhed against the panes, searching for a way in. The creature had surrounded him, an army of darkness laying siege to his tower of light. With a groan of protesting metal, the gear caught. The lantern lurched, then began to turn, its powerful beam once again sweeping across the churning sea. Silas jumped down from the mechanism just as a crack splintered across the nearest pane of glass. He snatched up the focusing lens, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. A black tendril, sharp as obsidian, punched through the cracked glass. It whipped through the air, aiming for his throat. Silas met it with the focused beam. The tendril vaporized with a piercing shriek. But another smashed through the glass beside it, and then another. The room was filled with the sound of shattering glass and the screeching of the fog's teeth. He couldn't hold them all off. He was one man against an army. He looked from the small lens in his hands to the giant, rotating lens of the lighthouse itself. A final, mad idea took hold. He had to unleash the light. All of it. He scrambled back up the ladder and began to tear away the safety housing from the lantern's core. With the final panel removed, the raw, untamed power of the lantern was freed. An explosion of pure, white light erupted outwards, turning the top of the lighthouse into a miniature sun. The fog vaporized, the tendrils dissolved, and a single, unified scream of agony echoed from the sea before being utterly silenced. Silas fell to the floor, shielding his eyes from the cleansing, blinding glare. The fog was gone. The teeth were broken. For now,